Good evening. We welcome you to tonight's debate sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County and the Political Science Department of the University of Scranton. My name is Patty Fowler and I'm the League's current president. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan, which means we do not support nor oppose any political party nor candidate. The mission of the League is to promote political responsibility through the informed and active participation by citizens in their government. We encourage you to join the League. Membership information can be found in your program, or you can go to the website printed in your program, www.lwvlackawanna.org. We are an all-volunteer organization. Please support our work by making a donation on your way out. Donations help us to cover the costs, including taping, so that the debates can be viewed by a wider audience. ECTV is taping tonight's debate. Taped debate will be available on YouTube and via links from our website tomorrow. This is not a live broadcast. However, ECTV will air the program on Comcast 19 local TV. Please check your ECTV schedule. A link can be found again in your program. Every candidate here tonight signed a debate agreement that included our audiovisual policy as follows. No part of any authorized or unauthorized recording of this debate may be used or distributed by any person, candidate, campaign, or political group for any purpose whatsoever. You may provide a link to the ECTV LWV video on your campaign website. Unauthorized recording is not allowed. To that end, we ask you to please silence and put away your phones and other devices. The most important event is Election Day, Tuesday, November 6th. Don't forget to vote. A sample ballot can be found at the Lackawanna County Elections website. On a private note, I'd like to thank everyone that's here tonight, and I'd also like to thank everyone included with the League of Women Voters. All of us who put it together, all of us are here tonight. Without them, this would not be possible. Our moderator is Jean Harris. Dr. Harris is presently on the faculty of the University of Scranton Political Science Department in Women's Studies. In addition, she is coordinator of the Ready to Run Northeastern Pennsylvania. She is currently on the board of the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County and has been past president. Dr. Harris.
Thank you. I'd like to just first talk about how we will proceed tonight. So I will introduce each of the candidates with a brief bio that they shared with us. Then I'll ask the candidates the same questions. They both will have 2 minutes to answer each question. They have not seen the questions before. The questions were developed by the League of Women Voters. In the front row, our League member Denise will hold up a sign when there's 30 seconds left for the candidates to know, and then a stop sign at the end. We ask that the candidates, they can complete their thought, but then should end their statement, or I may have to ask them to stop. Each candidate will also have 4 one-minute rebuttal opportunities. So they can ask for a rebuttal, they just need to kind of let me know, flag me down, and I'll take time for the rebuttal. At the end, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Prior to the closing statements, we ask that the audience remain quiet, don't applaud, don't make any noise, make sure you have your phones off. This way we can get through all of the questions. But then once the candidates do their closing statements, that is the time that you can respond to the candidates. We drew straws at an X on a little piece of paper outside in the hallway to see who would go first. And Mr. Scavo will go first to answer the first question. And then the next question will be answered first by Mr. Blake. And we also drew to know who would do the closing statements first, and Mr. Blake will do his closing statement first, and then Mr. Scavo. Having said that, I will move on to the brief bios for the candidates. Senator John Blake was born in Scranton and currently resides in Archbald, Pennsylvania. He and his wife Louise are the parents of Vince and Katie. A 1978 graduate of Valley View High School, Senator Blake holds the following degrees: a BA from Villanova, an MSW from Marywood, and an MBA of Finance from the University of Scranton. In addition, he completed the Executive Education course in Public Management from Harvard JFK School of Government. Mr. Blake has served as PA State Senator for the 22nd District since 2011. having been elected to a second term in 2014. The candidate has held prior positions as adjunct faculty at the Kenya School of Management, the University of Scranton, Executive Deputy Secretary, PA Department of Community and Economic Development, Director, Northeast Regional Office of the Governor, Vice President for PNC Bank, Executive Director of Northeast PA Visitors Bureau and the Lackawanna County Redevelopment Authority, and Administrative Officer for the Pennsylvania Department of Community Affairs. Additionally, he served a 2-year fellowship with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Mr. Blake's numerous professional and civic associations have included statewide, regional, and local affiliations. Among them are several state Senate committees, including Veterans Affairs, Finance and Local Government, as well as Emergency Preparedness. A few local affiliations that he's been involved with include United Cerebral Palsy of NEPA, the Advocacy Alliance, United Neighborhood Centers, and the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick. Mr. Scavo was born in Scranton and currently resides in Old Forge, Pennsylvania. He and his wife Karen are the parents of Sarah Angelina and Frank Scavo IV. A graduate of Old Forge High School, Mr. Scavo received an AS degree in Business Management from Keystone College. In addition, he is a Dale Carnegie graduate with courses in Human Relations and High Impact Presentation. Mr. Scavo also holds credits in engineering from Penn State University. As a member of the Old Forge School Board, he has held the position of Board President, Budget and Finance Chairman, and as Chairperson for Contract Negotiations. Additionally, Mr. Scavo was a candidate for PA Senate in 2001 and 2010. He is a member of the board of Pennsylvania Right to Work. Mr. Scavo is currently CEO of Scavo Investment Properties after having spent 30 years in corporate management with Keystone Automotive. He has also worked as a consultant for Wall Street investment firms and CK Audit. So now, having given you a brief bio for each of the candidates, we'll start with the first question, which again will be answered by Mr. Scavo. Thank you. And the first question is, please share with us your top 3 priorities for legislative action, and include in your answer what resources will be needed to bring them to fruition and what obstacles lie in the way of implementing these priorities.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you to Andrea and Diane and everyone else within the League of Women Voters. I'd also like to thank Senator Blake. I have the honor of debating Senator Blake and presenting my ideas and views to everyone in this room and everyone that's watching on whatever electronic medium they prefer. Having said that, my number one priority, and the number one priority that I've heard and have seen votes returned on in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, is the elimination of the school district property taxes. That's number one. Number 2, or 1.5, with the elimination of those school district property taxes, we will invite large businesses to relocate into Pennsylvania and provide the 200,000 students that we export a year from all of our state universities to remain here and become employed in these new industries which we attract to Pennsylvania with the elimination of the school district property taxes. Also on my way here tonight, which could be number 3, the interstate system and the roads. I would say that we desperately need a 3rd lane on Interstate 81, if just from the Montage Road exit here to Scranton. We can't get people into the city of Scranton in a timely fashion, and Interstate 81 turns into a parking lot, which it was never designed to be. So those are the top 3. The impediments, well, if we would get our fiscal house in order, you know, Pennsylvania doesn't have a spending problem, it has a taxation problem. And that problem is we have to tax too much to satisfy our spending. We don't prioritize. I'm sure there's many questions that will arise in this debate that are going to show that we have to prioritize because we do not have a printing press, and you, the people, how much money can we possibly take from you? Oh, that was a fast 2 minutes, so. To be continued.
Thank you. Mr. Blake, the same question to you. Your top 3 priorities and what resources will be needed to bring them to fruition and what obstacles lie in the way of implementing them.
Sure. So first of all, again, thank you to the league. Thank you to the University of Scranton for hosting us, Dr. Harris for your being here, as well as for, again, the opportunity to debate my friend Frank. We've done this before, but anyone who jumps into this arena deserves respect, so I'm glad to be with you here tonight. In terms of priorities, I think responsible top property tax relief is a priority. I've said this for a long time, that we can get this right in a manner that guarantees adequate funding for public education, because we have a constitutional obligation to provide a thorough and efficient public education. The proposals that we will debate here tonight, we will probably get into greater detail, but responsible school property tax relief is a priority, and we can get there if we do it right. I think it's important for us to keep in mind that we have a whole pile of people that aren't earning sufficient wages. In northeastern Pennsylvania, the minimum wage locks people into poverty. We have many women and many, young men starting out at work, or young women starting out at work at 19 years old that simply aren't getting paid sufficiently. We could free up 1.2 million people across the state if we would deal with the minimum wage issue. Fair taxation, 70% of the corporations in Pennsylvania don't pay the corporate net income tax. I think this is a problem. We have seen the business community's share of revenues coming into Harrisburg decline for many years, and that puts more burden on working Pennsylvanians, and it does create, inequity in our tax system. So, the impediments. I think that, in my opinion, we need to come together and understand that we are in this together with respect to school property tax. The all or nothing approach, that it's this way or the highway, gets you what? Nothing. We have to come together and understand we have a responsibility to fund public education and do so responsibly while providing relief to the people who need it most, particularly fixed income seniors and retirement income households. Thank you.
Thank you. The second question deals with redistricting, and Mr. Blake will answer this first. Throughout the 2017-18 legislative session, a bill to put an end to partisan gerrymandering received hearings and was voted out of the Senate State Government Committee. Ultimately, the bill failed on the Senate floor due to the attachment of an unrelated amendment. Therefore, the redistricting process will not be reformed in time for the 2020 census. The question is, do you support reforming our congressional and state legislative redistricting process? If yes, what changes in the process would you advocate? If no, please explain why you support the current process.
The answer to the question is yes. Every year that I've been in Harrisburg, every legislative session that I've been in Harrisburg, and that's 4, I've introduced a bill of my own as prime sponsor to establish an independent citizens commission for the purpose of getting lawmakers out of drawing their own lines. In that state government committee meeting, I testified at that hearing about Senate Bill 22. Fair Districts Pennsylvania has been a very loud voice on behalf of many Pennsylvanians who believe the current system is incorrect and is corrosive to our democracy. The fact of the matter is that we need to get out of drawing our own lines. I've said that since 2010, and there is a way to get this right. We have new members, hopefully, that will be coming in to the General Assembly in January, so that maybe we can get 102 votes in the House and 26 in the Senate and a gubernatorial signature, so that by the time we get to the next census, which is 2030, we can actually have a system that is right and not set up so that we can choose our voters instead of our voters choosing us. Long and short of it is, we have to have a constitutional amendment. It's a very difficult process. It requires legislation in 2 sessions. It requires a referendum voted to by the voters of Pennsylvania. And I think the more and more voices that rise demanding this of us, we will finally, as public servants, hear those voices and actually legislate to correct this problem. I will say one last thing in closing. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania sent a signal to lawmakers about getting this wrong and resetting the congressional maps. They did not affect the state Senate maps or the House district maps, but we can't get away with gerrymandering any longer. The courts won't tolerate it. We should do our job and make sure that the citizens can get it right. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania said so. The U.S. Supreme Court affirmed their decision, and they were able to find an independent third party who can put up a fair map. So it is possible to be done by citizens in a private way.
Thank you. Mrs. Scavo, the same question to you. So do you support reforming our congressional and state legislative redistricting processes? If yes, what changes Would you advocate for, and if no, please explain why you support the current process?
Yes, but here's the deal. There's rules to the game. I mean, whether you're playing Candyland or whether you're down at Mohegan Sun at a gambling table, there's rules to politics, and there's constitutional amendments, and there's a constitution. First off, the rogue judges that drew the map, okay, a judge could say this map doesn't look good and we don't agree with it, send it back to the existing committees and redraw it. Not what they did. I would be in favor of impeaching those judges because they're rogue. They don't have the authority to do this, especially in the 10th hour of an election. I don't care what side you're on, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Green. So those guys needed to have senators say, listen, this is breaking the Constitution. Listen, what we do here in this game, our battles are fought at the ballot box. They're not fought by rogue judges that say, okay, we're going to do something that they don't have the authority to do that, yet we all abided by these laws.
Yeah.
So, I applaud Senator Blake that he wants to go by the rules and change it. So will I. But the deal is, what they did and trying to go around, as a Republican, I'm in the minority. The registration throughout the state, throughout America, Republicans are minorities. How do we guarantee representation? Well, who's going to draw that map? It's going to be a very difficult task to ensure that minorities get the right representation. Now, I can tell you this, 30 seconds. There are a lot of good Democrats, and I separate the Democrat registration from the liberal registration because those are the people we could cross the aisle with and work with to get good representation because we're all in it together. But I do tell you, after supporting the redrawing of the district, that it will be drawn correctly and not against a Pennsylvania constitutional law because that was rogue.
Thank you. The next question deals with the size of the state legislature, and Mr. Scavo will get this first. Pennsylvania has 203 members in its state house and 50 state senators. This is the largest full-time legislature in the United States. Pennsylvania's legislators' base salary is more than $87,000. Only California taxpayers pay their state legislators more than Pennsylvania taxpayers pay our legislators. So the question is, do you support a constitutional amendment to reduce the size of the legislature? And please explain your position.
Okay, why do we need more laws and more constitutional amendments to do common sense measures? Okay, the Constitution does not say that we need the back staff, the staff that costs more money operating behind Senator Blake and any other seated elected official in Harrisburg. I don't want to cut John Blake as my representative from the roster, nor any state representatives. These are the guys that need to get out into the field, get out, because they work 105 days a year. Whether you know it, the session is 105 days a year. The rest of the time, they need to be out in the district. I want to cut that representation to cut costs? No, I'm not looking to take away your representation. I'm looking at cutting the back staff behind that. Senator Blake has Kyle Mullins as his legislative assistant. Probably a top-notch, very bright guy. But what I say is, the senators and the representatives, they better write the bill. They better know the bill, not have to sign it to know what's in it, so that your senator or state rep can effectively argue and write legislation, not needing the 20 guys behind them, where the expense is, with all the health care and pensions and whatever else they may get as a benefit. We could slim down government, but not slim down your representation. So you understand what I'm saying? Cut expenses, but not cut the people that are directly responsible to you, because you need them. When Senator Blake, I'm not sure if he circulates his own petitions, but when I'm knocking on doors to get the 750 signatures, I see the pain and suffering out there in Northeast Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question to you, Mr. Blake.
So I voted for the reduction of the General Assembly while a senator. I represent 255,000 people in 47 communities across 3 counties. My friend and colleague Lisa Baker represents the same 255,000 people, but her district sprawls probably across 4 counties, maybe more. Probably takes her 2 to 3 hours to drive from one end of her district to the other. I believe, truthfully, I'm always truthful with the people of the 22nd district, that the size of the Senate is right-sized. That if we were to reduce the size of the Senate, you create distance between the elected official and the constituent. too much distance. You also create expensive campaigns that touch too many media markets, and you take people that are of modest income, working class Pennsylvanians who may want to run for office and may want to get into public service. You almost eliminate the possibility for them to do so because only rich people would be able to run for office. Now, the House. Ask anyone in the House, ask anyone who served in the House, ask people who have retired from the House, ask leaders that have retired from the House. They will say the House is too big at 203 members. You put a bill up, you get 100 amendments. It's a little bit unwieldy. Size of the committees is large. The voice of the representative sometimes gets crowded by other voices. So I believe that the House probably could see a reduction in size where their districts are now at 65,000. I think the idea of getting them to about 85,000 doesn't do what I mentioned earlier in terms of creating too much distance between a constituent and an elected representative. But the cost of government is a fraction of the cost of state government. It's a fraction. And believe me when I tell you, I don't have a large staff, but I do lean on those staff, and I lean on the lawyers in Harrisburg to make sure that we get statutory construct that deals with the founding fathers' original map and the Constitution for the operation of government. Democracy is hard work. It takes talented people to make sure you get it right.
Would you like one
What
of your
is the time
rebuttals?
for the rebuttal? Is it 30 seconds?
A minute.
A minute for rebuttal. Okay, I'd like to have a rebuttal on that. You know, when you hear the name Scavo, I want you to think of action. Scavo, action. Now, John talks about some large territories. I'll represent the same 255,000 people roughly. That's part of Luzerne County, that's all of Lackawanna County, and that's some of Monroe County. But in the private industry, when I answer directly to customers and stockholders and the boardroom, my territory spanned from the triple cities, Binghamton, Endicott, Johnson City, New York, down to Lock Haven, past Williamsport. That I could traverse that whole area in one day and make sure that everybody was visited and had their issues solved. So guess what? I'm here to work, and I will work that whole territory, which is larger than we currently what I will represent in the Senate. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question deals more with the cost side of the state legislature, which we somewhat touched on, and Mr. Blake will answer this first. As noted in the previous question, Pennsylvania legislators' base salary is more than $87,000 a year. The median household income in Pennsylvania in 2016 was about $55,000 a year. And that's the income for more than one person in the household, anybody over the age of 15 who's working. So it's a collective income. In addition to their salary, Pennsylvania legislators also receive numerous benefits, including per diems with no need to document expenses, substantial pensions, and lifetime health care after serving 8 years in the Senate or 10 years in the House. While the debate on the constitutional amendment to cut the size of the General Assembly continues, what specific legislation would you advocate to reduce the cost of the General Assembly? Mr. Blake.
So I've already co-sponsored legislation that was introduced by Senator Randy Vlukovic to eliminate per diems and go to receipts and direct reimbursements as documented for legislative work. I've already lived that for 7 years. I didn't take a per diem in the Senate. I spent $40,000 in paying rent. They were non-reimbursed expenses because Senate rules wouldn't allow me to be reimbursed. So I supported the legislation that would remove per diems and go to direct receipts and reimbursement. The Republican majority and the Senate has not brought that out of committee, has not given me the permission to vote it on the floor. The other issues associated with efficiencies, and we've been able to achieve a couple of these, would be issues associated with combined services, media services, and other what I would call dual caucus, using the same professionals for the same kinds of things that are kind of apolitical support services. And we've actually reduced some of the cost of the Senate by sharing services with our Senate colleagues. I've actually been very careful and prudent with respect to my own staffing in the Senate. Whatever budget they give me, I return money to the general fund every year because I don't exhaust what I'm given as a budget. I don't believe I need to use even what they've authorized me to use. So I'm prudent and very frugal with respect to your dollars that pay for us to conduct business in state government. And again, as I said, I've supported the legislation to get rid of per diems, but I haven't been able to vote on it.
Thank you. Mr. Scavo, the same question?
There's that name, Scavo, action. We're already doing this, not a correction of pronunciation. Just say, private industry already has this. There's no per diems. It's all receipt-based. What's going on here? The problem is, John just said it. He can't bring his legislation to the floor because he's a Democrat. That's minority representation. Harrisburg is controlled by Republicans, which is not always a good thing. I would bring majority representation, and what else I would do, I would report to you and the Scranton Times and whoever else. I'd say, here's the people, because it's collegial down in Harrisburg. They try not to upset the apple cart. Why? Because they're spending your money. What I would do is call out the people that will not bring it to the floor. And if that involves the Senate Majority Leader, so be it. I will leverage our votes because they'll need our votes to get what they want passed, because when I go to Harrisburg, I'll start the Freedom Caucus and we'll stop the willy-nilly, out-of-control spending and get the legislation that John just mentioned. That's some good legislation, John, but unfortunately, you can't get it introduced. Well, that's what we need to change. That's part of what needs to change. So really, majority representation, put me on the floor, and then I will go after the issues that we all think are common sense and keep saying, why can't we get these items passed? Well, you know what? You need somebody that's gonna be serious down there, somebody that's gonna not so much break the rules, but go outside and exert pressure. And that's what it takes. People respond to pressure. Management. That's why we have management. But, you know, all good ideas. I won't take a per diem. The pensions are out of control. So what? Let's fix it.
Thank you. The next question deals with election procedures. Pennsylvania is one of only 13 states that uses a closed primary system. In a closed primary, registered voters can participate in their own party's primary election to select candidates for the general election. For people registered in a third party, a party other than the Democratic or Republican Party, or registered to vote without a party affiliation, they typically cannot participate in primary. This means approximately 1/3 of the registered voters cannot vote in primary election. There are several state officials on both sides of the aisle who are calling for a change to, or have proposed calling for a change to open Pennsylvania primaries. So the question which Mr. Scavo will answer first is, do you support opening Pennsylvania's primary to independent and third-party registered voters? Why or why not?
Here's what I support. First off, to get on the ballot, the amount of signatures have to be equal per party. It's too high of a threshold, and I know because I circulated 750 signatures this year during the blizzard, during the weather, and it's a very difficult but necessary. When you're gathering these signatures, you go out into the homes of seniors, of young people, of every walk of person that there is, and you can actually experience what they have. They bring into your home kitchen table. You can see if they're suffering. You can see if they're wearing 3 coats in their home and the temperature's set at 50 degrees because they can't afford, because they lived on a fixed income. So I would say that the signature level has to be the same. If it's 500 to run for the state senate, then it's 500 for a Green Party, Independent, Democrat, Socialist, Communist, whoever you are. Then you get onto the ballot. So an open primary? No, because there's too much tomfoolery. But a primary for each of your respective parties? Absolutely. And then let it occur at the ballot box. And if there is if there's a swell, or if parties want to align and support each other, if all the Greens want to join with the Socialists and the Green Democrats and whatever else, then let them get behind a candidate. But I don't like an open primary, because what could happen is people may cross over and put up a weaker candidate and vote for them. So there's too much possibility for cross-party, just a dishonest result from a primary.
Thank you. Mr. Blake?
So I differ from my opponent on this one. And I'm actually very glad to report to all of you that the pro tem of the Senate, Joe Scarnati from Jefferson County, has come around on this idea, and he may actually use his influence in the Republican majority to move legislation to actually open up Pennsylvania's primary. So why do I feel this way? I think it really comes from the people I represent, people on both sides of the aisle. I was at a senior housing project that opened up in Moscow last week. I had a woman come up to me and say, I don't understand this. I can't vote for the person I want to vote for in a primary. I think you have to measure, I think most of the people want to make a measure of the men or women who run for these offices. And I think they'd like to have an opportunity to vote for them on the basis of how they measure them, not by the party that they're in. So the idea of an open primary is actually attractive to me. I would support it if the legislation came to the floor. I think the quality of the candidate is more important than the party that they represent. And I do believe that when you consider some of the elements that make democracy work harder for the people who it should be working hardest for, this is one of them. We mentioned gerrymandering. Closed primaries is another one. The issue, the effect of money in our politics, and the fact that we at the top of the parties like to circle the horses and keep control. But that's not what we're supposed to be doing, because the control is supposed to be in the hands of the people. And if the people have an opportunity to vote for the quality candidates that they want, they might actually get better representation.
Thank you. The next question deals with conflict of interest concerns, and Mr. Blake will answer this first. Pennsylvania's law places no limit on the size or number of gifts that an elected official can accept. Elected officials need only disclose gifts worth $250 or more, and transportation and hospitality worth $650 or more. Sizable gifts create an appearance of corruption and may in fact lead to money-driven policy, eroding the integrity of the office. So Mr. Blake, what reforms will you advocate for to prevent the appearance of corruption and money-driven policy in Pennsylvania state government?
So again, I've already supported legislation that would take into consideration the executive branch gift ban and apply it to the General Assembly. I've only, in my years in office, I've only reported one gift in 8 years, only one. And that was when Joe Biden was being awarded a special award in New York during the Pennsylvania Society. And a third party offered me a ticket to get into the dinner. It was the only way I could get in. So I reported it as a gift, but I have never taken another gift at all, and never will, as a senator. I don't need to be in that space where my credibility is going to be questioned about who I'm answering to because I got a gift from someone. So I support the gift ban. The governor, to his credit, Governor Wolf, to his credit, has actually put a gift ban in effect for executive offices in his cabinet and executive employees. We should do the same thing in the General Assembly. The reporting requirements, I've also supported lobbyist reporting requirement changes, campaign finance reports that are done all electronically instead of paper, which slows the distribution of information to citizens about who's contributing to who. But I've already supported these measures and I'll continue to support them.
Thank you. Mr. Scavo, the same question to you.
Private industry already has this, gifts, that's it's archaic, but it is influence. Now let's talk about influence. I have teachers, family members that contribute good union dues because they deserve collective bargaining and bargaining rights. But how about the contribution from teachers' unions to political candidates? That the dues are forced and compulsory. That's one heck of a gift. I don't have that type of gift financing my campaign. In fact, if you look at my numbers, probably about $20,000 right now, maybe a little more, made up of small individual contributions. John, I think he's $460 or something, around $460,000, somewhere around there, with teachers union contributions in there. So money is free speech, and when you have companies financing campaigns, that's the way it is. But that's not compulsory. When a portion of a union member's dues are given to a political candidate, let's say that teacher is a Republican and they're paying their union dues, and then that money is given to a Democratic candidate. That's one heck of a gift. So that should be eliminated. But that's a big that's what I'm fighting, and that's what every other candidate that doesn't receive teachers union contributions fights. And if a teacher wants to contribute directly, fine, that's great. But those union dues, which are sacred and they should be used to fund retirement at the end of a career, should not be dissected and given for political purposes. So that's.
Yes, Mr. Blake's gonna take his first rebuttal.
So first of all, listen, I'm proud to be supported by teachers and I'm proud to support public education. I think that the collective bargaining rights of a labor union are sacrosanct. I think that these dues that are being paid voluntarily by teachers who are glad to support the causes that their leadership and their union fight for, which is fair wages and fair health care and a decent retirement. So, at the end of the day, we've already seen the Supreme Court of the United States shot down fair share recently, so that means if you're not in the union, and even though you're benefiting from their collective bargaining efforts, you no longer are obliged to pay for it. So that's off the table. This issue of compulsory, I think, is deceptive. The thing is that what we have is a responsibility for people who are of like mind to support candidates who advance their causes. Now, I told you that I'm for lobbyist, reform, and that we have disclosure, full disclosure, and full transparency with respect to those contributions. But Citizens United, how about that Supreme Court ruling? How about the private money that goes in to your side of the aisle? And nobody knows where it comes from. So I think unions have a right to make a contribution. Maybe we should know where the private dollars are coming from as well.
Thank you. I think we have a second rebuttal.
1 minute rebuttal. Currently, the Commonwealth Foundation is guiding teachers, multiple. They have a lawsuit in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that are strictly requesting that they do not have to contribute to the union because of the fact that their union dues are going to political candidates. And some of them may be Republican, I don't know, mostly Democrat, I suppose. But to say, to couch John's answer in the fact that, well, we believe, I'm not sure if John's trying to say that I don't believe, but teachers have a right for collective bargaining. I'm saying that the monies should stay within the teachers' union and not be given as gifts, because that was the question, to candidates that are in their back pocket.
Thank you. The next question deals with leadership in the Senate, and Mr. Scavo will answer this first. It has been said that Harrisburg is the place where legislation goes to die. In the last session, bipartisan, popularly supported bills, including redistricting reform and the removal of guns from domestic violence situations, all died. Following the November 6th election, members of the Pennsylvania Senate will elect their leadership for the next session. If elected, what will you do to promote a Pennsylvania Senate leadership that ensures that the will of the people is considered above partisan politics? Mr. Scavo.
Oh, I can tell you this, what will I do? You'll know what I do. Remember, Scavo, action. Currently, talk radio. If you listen to it, you're well informed, you know all the issues. We're currently waiting for Senator Blake to accept an invitation to speak on WILK Talk Radio. So what will I do? Anybody that's not being represented by you or being active in passing this type of legislation, I'll call them out. I'll give you their phone number. Here, you could call a Senate Majority Leader Scrinotti and you could talk to him and say what's going on. It's pressure from you and I. So that's definitely how I'll conduct myself. I do it right now. I do it in the Scranton Times. And this morning there was a article from Chris Kelly that says, Chris Thomas is saying that Frank Scavo has talked about things that he shouldn't. Well, what I just saw in Friday's Scranton Times was Senator Blake. He talked about combining the PSER system and the SCRS retirement systems, and he got the attention of Governor Wolf's office pretty fast, and they threw him under the bus, and they said, well, that's not exactly what we're thinking of, John. And John had to say, well, I guess I almost spoke on that one. So that's how I'll do it, through what you read and through what you hear every day. Scranton Times, WLK, Newswatch 16. We had a great candidate interview on W Channel 28, WBRA, Andy Mahalchik, Dave Bowman. That's how we'll do it. We'll put pressure on everybody. It won't be real news, it won't be fake news, and it won't be no news like John, because geez, it seems like when John gets in that newspaper, the things don't, I don't know, that was a big one. The governor has never called me out on anything, especially something as important as combining the pensions and,
Mr. Blake, the question is, if elected, what will you do to promote a Pennsylvania Senate leadership that ensures that the will of the people is considered above partisan politics?
So a couple of things. First of all, I accepted the invitation to go on WILK in case anybody's wondering. I will be doing that. But I would also want to point out that this question is about Senate leadership. I happen to be in Senate leadership. The reality of it is that I have spent 8 years. If I can't work with Republican leadership, I can't do anything for the people I represent. And the reason is because it's 34-16 in the Senate. I have to work twice as hard for half as much. But let me tell you something. I've been an effective lawmaker on behalf of the people I represent, and that's because I have friends in the Republican Party. And I work with them every day. And I deliver for the people I represent, not because I provoke, not because I'm going to poke them in the eye, because we're ideologically different, because they're in the Republican Party and I'm in the Democratic Party. It's because I'm in the Senate. And we respect the parliamentary procedures in the Senate and the congressional and the constitutional, prerogatives of the Senate. With respect to leadership in the Senate, I've had to go to Senator Scarnati and Senator Corman and Senator Brown time and time again to fight for the things that I believe in and that are important to the people I represent. And guess what? They've been responsive. They've been responsive, and I've gotten things across the finish line and signed into law by the governor. We can be responsive to the people's needs when we work together. But if we're going to sit in these separate tents with people that think alike and not communicate with one another or provoke one another or not deal in civil discourse, that's when the people aren't served. I'm already in Senate leadership. I hope to rise up in it to be more effective on behalf of the people I represent.
Thank you. The next question deals with public employee pension reform. Pennsylvania's $71 billion unfunded pension liability is unsustainable for taxpayers and puts public employees at risk. Without timely reform, pension payments will crowd out funding for other services, property taxes will rise, and teachers may be laid off. Good pension reform means fixing the broken system and paying down pension debt without borrowing. Mr. Blake, will you share with us your plan for reforming public employee pensions?
We have already reformed public employees' pensions. I've worked for 8 years on this with Senator Pat Brown, and we have actually done some meaningful reform. The reason that our pension system is broken, 2 reasons. One, really irresponsible public policy decisions made in the early 2000s, long before I got into the Senate, regarding the generosity of benefits. And the generosity of benefits, assuming that the market was always going to be growing and everything was going to be fine, and we're going to take care of our workers. Well, guess what? The market crashed, and then we ended up paying the fiddler, okay? We've taken that generosity off the table, and we've introduced the 401A, which is the private sector, public sector equivalent of a 401K, as an option for future employees. The other thing that has destroyed our pension system is the failure of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to make actuarial required contributions as required every year to guarantee that the employer contribution, not the employees, because they were paying, not the investment returns, because the systems were actually performing, but the employee contributions. We were second lowest in the nation, behind only New Jersey, in meeting our actuarial required contribution to those systems for decades. And when you don't make the employer contribution, they don't have the assets under management, they can't invest the money, we don't get the returns, and the systems have an unfunded liability. We are grinding down the unfunded liability as I speak. Act 120 of 2010, before I got into the Senate, it was written by Pat Brown, for the most part, is requiring us to grind down that unfunded liability, and we are bending that arc. When we get out 5, 6, 7 years from now, that arc is going to, provided the market, continues to perform. If we bend that arc down, the crowding out of pension obligations by our school districts will be reduced, and they'll be able to put that money into the classroom where it belongs. We are already in the midst of reform, but I would tell you, it would be irresponsible for me to tell you that it's good for us to do some kind of reform that's going to take the legs out from underneath our retirees so that they become dependent on state services when they retire. Retirement dignity has got to be part of this discussion. And I believe that we accomplished that in the reform that we got to the governor's desk last year.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Same question to you, Mr. Scavo?
Contributions are another code word for increased tax rates. So when we talk about underfunding and contributions, here's what I say is the problem. There was a midnight pay raise. There was a increase in pay, 25 and 50% that equates directly to a pension payout. So we have to pay that back. That's where Senate Bill 76, and here's the uniqueness of this, it eliminates everybody's property tax, businesses and homeowners. How else are you gonna have a more economic boom in Pennsylvania that will help us work out of $76 billion? Our state budget is $30 billion right now. That isn't even in the budget. So add those two up to $104 billion. There's only one way to get out from under this, and pension reform. Yeah, I get scared when I hear the word reform, just like that property tax reform. And what happened with that? With the gambling? Nothing that Harrisburg seems to have done really works. What do we need to do? Private industry, get people in here, more jobs, more of a tax base, more of a manufacturing base, and guess what? We'll work that pension down, and it's not gonna happen overnight because we have promises to teachers and state employees. But really, there's no other way to fix this other than raising your taxes, whether it's through property tax, sales tax. One of my proposals that was in Scranton Times, tax alcohol to help fund pensions. Put another percentage on the sales tax, but it's never going to grow away until we grow our economy to get out of this, because it's twice what our current state budget is, and it's not even on the budget. So Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth, well, here's what I can tell you. My son, Frank, is in the audience. Frank, you may make $100,000 a year, but you're gonna come home with $10,000 because that's gonna be the tax rate.
Thank you. The next question specifically deals with education funding. Pennsylvania's Constitution requires the General Assembly to provide, and I quote, to provide for the maintenance and support of a thorough and efficient system of public education, and that is for all PA school children. According to the Public Interest Law Center, Pennsylvania has the most inequitable school funding system in the country. Communities with lower property values have 33% less to spend on students than communities with higher property values. And so the question, which Mr. Scavo will answer first, if elected, what will you advocate for in order to address the inequitable school funding that exists in our state?
Well, first we go Senate Bill 76, which provides dollar for dollar replacement, and it also gives the state education budget another $350 million without raising your taxes, because it's no longer driven by an antiquated look. I haven't paid my property taxes yet. The last day to pay these property taxes is next Wednesday. So now we have to wait from the property tax bill issuance until November 1st. So we have to take, your school district has to take out tax anticipation notes. When you switch it to Senate Bill 76, it's done at point of sale. Every penny for sales tax is funneled to Harrisburg immediately, and it's on your payroll. So that's funneled to Harrisburg immediately. Now, what we can do from there, you know, these guys have been in Harrisburg for a long time. John's been down there 8 years. That's $800,000 John has made. $800,000, and we still haven't fixed the basic education formula that will help Scranton School District, because you're having an influx of population. It'll help the Old Ford School District. So there's a lot of tough questions that need to be answered down in Harrisburg, and all these guys make a lot of money, but what happens? It's collegial. You have to go down there, and you have to name names, and you have to come up with solid plans on how to do this, and it's not going to happen overnight because it took this long to get in this condition. So that's what I have to say.
Mr. Blake, the question is, if elected, what will you advocate for in order to address the inequitable school funding that exists in our state?
So since I've been the senator for the 22nd district, I have been a stalwart supporter of adequate public school funding. I did not vote for the cuts that occurred in the previous administration. I have voted for the increases that have occurred under Governor Wolf. My colleague here indicates, or my friend here says, that it's dollar for replacement. So I want you to think about that for a moment, because Senate Bill 76, dollar for dollar replacement, guarantees, it locks in the chronic underfunding of poor districts. That's what it does. It says dollar for dollar. If you're in a poor district and you're getting dollar for dollar, that's all you're going to get. I will not vote to increase your taxes by 61%, your income tax. I'm not gonna vote to increase your sales taxes by 17%. I'm not gonna vote to make you pay sales taxes on dozens and dozens and dozens of things you don't pay sales taxes on now. 61% personal income tax increase. Small businesses in this state that pay their corporate net income tax at the PIT rate, that's a bone-crushing job killer. 61%. That's why every business interest in the state opposes this bill. And how about this? All of the major corporations, multinational corporations, pharmaceutical companies, banks, casinos, Walmart, Sheetz, they pay $3 billion worth of property taxes right now. We're going to shift that $3 billion onto your back in the form of income tax and sales tax. We're going to chronically underfund schools, and we're going to tax you on everything, from soup to nuts. From the cradle to the grave, you're going to get taxed. It is bad for taxpayers. It is bad for our schools. And the all or nothing approach will get us nothing. We have to focus relief on the people who need it most, and we have to, as the Constitution says, adequately fund public education. We have a responsibility, when we own property in our communities, to take responsibility for the next generation of voters and workers and citizens. That's what public education does. There's a way to get this right, to provide the relief that needs to be provided, but to provide adequate funding for public education. I've been on the wall for public education for 8 years. I will stay on that wall as long as I'm a senator.
Thank you. The third of your floor.
That's the third. Okay. Bottom line is, do you want to own your own home? And how else are you going to grow out of this pension crisis? You know, when John states we're going to tax everything, he's right. We're going to tax funerals. Now, that's going to be a one-time event for most of us, but I can tell you this. The poor single mother out in Monroe County, which Senator Mario Scavo almost begged John to vote for Senate Bill 76, because John was the second to last vote, so he controlled its passage or its failure. That woman who pays $7,000 a year on a $30,000 income, don't try to argue, John, that it's regressive. It's not. This will free you. You'll be able to own your own home. And as for corporations not getting, or not paying taxes and shifting to us, the economy is going to grow. You can't use static figures, because guess what's happening now? The economy in America is growing. Whether we admit it or not, it's growing, and guess what's going to happen to the revenues for the school districts that John champions? It's going to grow. So if we don't do this, then you're going to be continued to raise the taxes on your home, because when John said it locks in the inequalities, everything goes up.
Thank you.
A rebuttal?
Yes, your second, thanks.
So, if you want to know about the parliamentary procedure in the Senate, every roll call vote is alphabetical. I'm B for Blake, which means I vote first, okay? There were 12 no Republicans that voted after me. Maybe you should talk to Gene Yaw in Williamsport, who voted the last vote. Every vote is worth the same in the Senate. My vote isn't weighted any more than anyone else's. I did not vote the deciding vote, and by the way, even if that had passed the Senate, there was no guarantee it was going to move in the House, and no guarantee it would be signed by the governor. The reality of it is, if it was easy and if it was right, it would have been done a long time ago. But it's not easy and it's not right. And until we negotiate the terms to get it right, we're all going to be sitting here upset that we're not helping the people who need it. And I'm going to say one other thing. Let's take Old Forge. Take a young family of 4, 2 kids. Average millage in Old Forge is 13.5, or average assessment 13.5. Average millage is about 0.13. So they're paying about $1,700 a month. Okay? All right, so they get a $1,700 break in their school property taxes, but they have to send their 2 kids to daycare. It costs $21,000 to send a kid to daycare. 17% increase in sales tax means they're paying $3,000 there, plus another $1,000 in income tax because of the 61% increase. That $1,700 is gone.
Thank you, Mr. Blake.
Do I have a
You have one
final
left.
rebuttal? Yeah. That's my friend Roundabout John. He's going roundabout the issues, which, by the way, I will ban roundabouts. John calls it terrible tax policy in the Scranton Times. John said that he's looking for answers to the property tax issue. John, it's 8 years, it's $800,000. Monroe County is the number 10 county in America, not in Pennsylvania, in America, for these property taxes being upside down. John, I'm not asking other senators how they voted, John. I'm asking you how you voted, and I'm asking Lisa Baker why she voted yes to it. John Udicek, a good Democrat that spoke to John Blake and said, we need this. John Udicek voted yes to this, and Mario Scavo, who endorsed me, said yes. So those are our 3 local senators that voted yes, If John voted yes, you would have had passage, you wouldn't have had property taxes, and we would have been on this juggernaut to see if, yes, we could finally take a little bit of a risk and what? Work to improve our state, our Commonwealth, and community, because we're like 49th in the nation for job creation. Follow me with that.
Thank you. The next question deals with living wage. Mr. Blake will answer first. As of January 2018, there are 29 states with a minimum wage higher than the federal minimum of $7.25 an hour. Pennsylvania is alone among the mid-Atlantic states in not raising the $7.25 hourly minimum wage since its adoption in 2009. The annual earnings for a full-time minimum wage worker is $15,080 at the current Pennsylvania minimum wage of $7.25. And full-time work means working 2,080 hours each year, which is a 40-hour work week. The federal government's poverty threshold for a one-person family in 2018 was $12,140. For a family of two, the poverty threshold is $16,460. So, Mr. Blake, please share with us your position and the rationale for it with regard to changing the Pennsylvania minimum wage.
So I mentioned this in my opening remarks already. The minimum wage in Pennsylvania is locking people into poverty. It seems to me that anyone who goes to work and works a 40-hour week should not be stuck in poverty. I would support legislation that would increase the minimum wage to $10.10, even if we do it incrementally over time, which had been suggested by a few Republican lawmakers. If we went to $10.10, we would raise 1.2 million people and their spending power. Every economist that looks at the minimum wage increase says that we increase consumption and it drives, ripple effects through the economy. 70% of women would be affected by that. 30% of young men and women who are 19 years or younger would be affected by an increase in the minimum wage. So I support it. I have folks that are working in group homes, working in serving persons with disabilities, intellectual disabilities, who haven't really seen a meaningful raise in their wages in years. They're having trouble taking care of the family, as they call them, the persons with intellectual disabilities, but they can't even take care of their own families with the wages that they're getting. And I've been battling for the Commonwealth to step up to guarantee that these direct service professionals be paid a fair wage. So I support an increase in the minimum wage. I think it would be a boon to our economy. I understand the detractors on this, but we are surrounded by states, all of whom pay more. And our workforce will migrate to where they can get paid more. Our nurses are already doing that, getting their nursing degrees here and migrating to higher pay markets. So we have an obligation to guarantee fair pay, and we should raise the minimum wage in Pennsylvania.
Thank you. The same question to you, Mr. Scavo.
If $10 works, why not $12.50 an hour? Why not 40? I went to a restaurant in Moscow and I spoke to the person that sells trays of pizza for $15 an hour, and their people get paid $7 or $8 an hour, maybe 10. And I asked him, what would a $15 an hour wage do to you? He said, put me out of business. So I have a solution for that person. Just double the price of your pizza. Sell it for $30, and then you could pay your people $15 an hour. Now, I don't know how many of you are going to pay $30 for a tray of pizza. Here's what I say, and this goes to senior citizens. Every dollar that you get in your COLA, your cost of living adjustment, usually goes to pay what? A tax that's increased on you, whether it's a property tax, whether it's your health care. So rather than raising the minimum wage, why don't we just cut down your debt burden, your tax burden? And guess what? You'll have more income without raising the cost for everyone. Now, that minimum wage, my advice is, look, move on, get the next job. Don't stay there. But for those that are stuck in those jobs, the minimum wage incremental increase, it could happen, but just be prepared for the result. And that's going to be a higher cost for whatever it is that you have. Businesses don't exist just so you could walk in the door and say hi. Look, they have to make a profit. They especially have to make a profit to pay their tax burden. So, raising the minimum wage, it could be a federal issue. They could do it at the federal level. We could do it at the state level. But the impact, guess what? I think there's more of a golden solution with lowering your taxes and tax rates, so we don't have to necessarily raise minimum wages. But for $10, yeah, I could agree with John on that.
Thank you. We're going to talk a little bit about the Keystone landfills. Over the past 4 years, the Keystone Sanitary Landfill's proposed expansion has been a hot topic here in Northeast Pennsylvania. Here's a two-part question. First, are you in favor of or opposed to the landfill's proposed expansion? And then second, what are the specific reasons for your position? So Mr. Scavo will answer this first.
You know, we had this situation down at Old Forge Taylor with the Alliance landfill. And you know what happens in Northeast Pennsylvania? We abandon each other, just like John's property tax vote. If we stick together, then guess what we do? We all win. What we did down at Old Forge is we made Alliance a good neighbor. Because two guys, myself and Bob Folger, after Old Forge had spent thousands of dollars fighting the landfill, here's what we asked for. Let's test for particulate matter at about 1 micron level. Let's use the same regulations that New York State and New Jersey and Connecticut and Massachusetts use. If we do that, then they're not going to truck the garbage down here from other states. And guess what? It's going to be our own garbage, and our own garbage has to go somewhere. So it's pretty simple. Am I in favor of the landfill being an obtrusive neighbor that stinks like in Dunmore now? No, absolutely not. Who could be in favor of it? But it's interstate commerce. Unless you regulate all landfills in Pennsylvania equally, which is the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, you're not going to be able to attack just the Naples landfill. It's got to be for all landfills, and that is very smart and wise policy. But yet we're not interested in it. We're not doing it. Why not? Well, you need somebody that came from a landfill town like Old Forge to say, yes, landfills are necessary, but here's the set of regulations that we're going to use for all landfills across the Commonwealth. And certainly, a landfill that's going to be higher than Elk Mountain here in Dunmore, yeah, that's not good. I'm going to be opposed to that type of expansion. But having our garbage locally with the same regulations as those from other states that truck it in here, yeah, it's going to be a good neighbor, because then the smell will be down, the volume will be down, truck traffic, dust, particulate matter, we'll be able to live with it.
Thank you.
So I've already gone on record in opposition to the expansion of the landfill and the scale of the expansion that's been suggested. I wrote an op-ed on this probably 2 or 3 years ago. I've been involved in public hearings. I've had meetings with Michelle Dempsey and the others that have been really the voice of opposition in my community. Long and short of it is, and I commend Senator Casey because he's tried to disincent some of the interstate commerce that my opponent has talked about here. I don't insinuate myself between a regulated entity and a regulating agency, but I have a responsibility to speak on behalf of the people I represent in opposition to something that they don't want. And I've done so, and I've joined my voices to theirs. The problem we have is that we don't divert enough of our waste. We don't recycle enough as a state. We don't create the opportunities to ensure that landfills don't have to expand. I said earlier, I represent 47 communities. They produce trash every day, and it goes into that landfill. There's too much out-of-state landfill coming here. If I thought we can figure out a way to disincent that, I would gladly ask Senator Casey or Congressman Cartwright to do something federally that will enable us to do that. But as long as we continue to produce the level of waste that we do, there's no incentive for landfills not to expand. Now, I also stepped up and engaged the Department of Health to conduct a health assessment as this process unfolded, and I was able to get Karen Murphy, who was then the Secretary of Health, to deploy her folks to do the kind of air assessments and air quality assessments that Frank has mentioned. And I was actually shocked to hear that there's no state law that requires that to happen in the midst of a state expansion. So there are things I can be legislatively active on, and I plan on being legislatively active on. I can't do anything retroactively, but I can write rules for the future that could protect the public interest, and I plan on doing that.
Thank you. State revenue. All state governments are seeking new revenue sources as fiscal stress has become the normal state of affairs in state budgets. Some additional revenue sources that we hear discussed in Pennsylvania include a severance tax or extraction tax on the removal of natural gas by for-profit companies, legalizing, regulating, and taxing recreational marijuana, closing the Delaware loophole that allows corporations conducting business in Pennsylvania not to be required to pay Pennsylvania corporate income taxes, and leasing state parklands to profit-making fracking companies. What new revenue sources would you turn to in order to raise more revenue to help balance the state budget and keep it in balance, Mr. Blake?
So we actually voted a severance tax in a bipartisan fashion out of the Senate in July of last year. It didn't get taken up by the House. The governor has proposed a severance tax that's progressive, that would be linked to the price of 1,000 square feet of gas extracted. I have said since 2010 that the Pennsylvania citizens should be compensated on the volume of natural gas being extracted from our state. When we were an importing state, taking in natural gas from Texas or Louisiana or wherever, the citizens of Pennsylvania paid a premium on that because those gas-producing states levy a severance tax. If we were to levy one now, as we are an exporting state, the folks downstream from those export lines would actually be paying revenues back to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So there's some, I think, merit in trying to get this right. It's not a panacea. It's not going to pay all our bills. But it would be, in my opinion, more fair to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and a fairer distribution of the benefits of the industry to all Pennsylvanians. Right now, the impact fee benefits more greatly the concentration of need where the drilling occurs, and that's proper, and we should protect that and keep that. But we could still be in line with other states, gas-producing states, in the severance tax if we did it on the volume of natural gas being extracted. The industry has actually come into my office in Harrisburg and said, get it over with. Just do it. It's okay. It's the cost of doing business. Don't kill us, but just get it right. Make it on par with other states. And let's just get this issue put behind us because we don't want the citizens of Pennsylvania thinking we're not good corporate partners. So, also on the corporate net income tax, I have put up a bill, again, in every legislative session to reduce the corporate net income tax from 9.9% down to 6.9% if we would do as 36 other states and the federal government has done, incorporate combined reporting. This would be the closing of the so-called Delaware loophole, and there, as I said earlier, there are several companies that are engaged in legal tax avoidance. And that's what they're doing, and that's what they're allowed to do. But we have ways that we think we can get a fairer tax policy in Pennsylvania if we close that loophole.
Thank you. Mr. Scavo?
So the Delaware loophole, 9.9% is the tax rate, but nobody's paying it because it's a Delaware loophole. You're getting 0%. So John says 6.9%. I'm a businessman. My duty, my job would be to promote business in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and take it from Delaware also, but from New Jersey, from New York, from Connecticut. So I ask, why 6.9%? Why not make it 3% and have businesses relocate here? You see it on, here, listen, KOZ zones, right? There's one in John's backyard right on the highway. It says it doesn't work, it's a terrible tax policy. But there's one right off the KC Expressway. Tax-free office space. What do? We make it so that when the companies move here, they can operate and be profitable. Because if they're not profitable, they don't come here. That's the point. Make Pennsylvania attractive, profitable. So that Delaware loophole, yeah, eliminate it and drop that tax rate from a proposed 6.9% down to 3%. And your companies will relocate here. Why? Because they're trying to make money. Secondly, our students need to be better prepared to go right into the industries versus going to college and going into college debt. So I would also realign our curriculum and get away from Common Core for sure. Marijuana. If we legalize marijuana, tax it, that's $385 million on a $30 billion budget with $71 billion of pension debt yet. We have to get serious about this stuff. A severance tax currently produces 209 million. Billion, B with the billion is your current budget. So even if we went and put a severance tax on and an impact fee, guess what? We have other issues that we need to resolve. These are drops in the bucket. And lastly, anything we do, like a severance tax or this impact fee, better dedicate it and not let it go to where your gambling tax dollars went that were supposed to eliminate property tax.
Thank you. The next question deals with the environment, and Mr. Scavo will answer this first. The use of green infrastructure is a cost-effective approach to reducing storm water and water pollution, especially in urban areas. Green infrastructure is designed to mimic nature and capture rainfall as its source by using vegetation, soils, and other elements and techniques. Philadelphia and Lancaster have become national leaders in the use of green infrastructure. So the question is, how can the General Assembly promote the use of green infrastructure to address the Commonwealth's serious flooding and water pollution problems?
I just read in the Scranton Times today that there's still flooding problems. Mr. Lenny Scavo talks about this at the Scranton Council meetings. We have to help Scranton out. Scranton needs help. It needs to go to a class 3 city instead of a class 2A city. If you take a look at my home when my wife and I built my home, look, we left all the trees there. We didn't cut all the trees down. That helps. Don't deforest. If the new construction green ideas are out there, then the state, us, the Commonwealth, should perhaps give a tax break that if you do go ahead and divert that water, instead of diverting it into our sanitary systems like we do now at the LLVSA, and they have the outflows and it pollutes the very nice Lackawanna River behind my home during a heavy rainfall. Yeah, there's things that we need to do here in the state, but we have to get our priorities in order, stop overspending, and instead of dumping that effluent right into the Lackawanna River, yes, you need to go ahead and what? Stormwater needs to be drained to the Lackawanna River, but not through the Scranton Sewer Authority, which was just sold, and I don't know if there's any hopes of getting that private industry to ever do what the government should be doing, which is regulating that, or getting the rainwater flow. They're talking about a rain tax. Now we're gonna have to pay taxes when it rains. How about just redirecting and stop wasting the money? That's what we need to do. That's what I would do in Harrisburg. There's a lot of ways that you could spend money. It comes up on the old Ford School Board all the time. We need this, we need that. Guess what? It's priority. You can't get everything, and we're not gonna keep taxing the people to death.
Thank you. Mr. Blake, the question is, how can the General Assembly promote the use of green infrastructure to address the Commonwealth's serious flooding and water pollution problems?
So two issues I want to raise here. First of all, Governor Wolf signed into law a bill that I was the prime sponsor on. I worked with Guy Reschenthaler, a Republican senator from Allegheny County. It's called PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy. It doesn't involve taxpayer money. It involves private financing for industrial, agricultural, and commercial concerns to finance in a very patient way the installation of green infrastructure. That's what it's about. So I'm in that space. I've been an environmental champion since I got into the Senate, and the environmental interests around this state have recognized my voting record on that matter. With respect to compliance, and I think that's what we're talking about here is compliance, and the issue that Frank brought up regarding the separation of stormwater from sewage treatment water. This is a federal issue that's come down upon us. It's a state issue that's come down upon us. It is a very, very heavy burden for the people I represent. I believe that water doesn't respect municipal borders, and if we're smart about this, as Luzerne County has been, we would have a countywide municipal stormwater management authority, and we would reduce the rain tax that my colleague has talked about over all the ratepayers of Lackawanna County, instead of concentrating in one community where the rates would be absolutely unimaginable for a concentrated set of ratepayers. Listen, at the end of the day, we have compliance problems because these are environmental protection issues for the water quality of the river. And we can thank the River Corridor Association and the Heritage Valley Authority and the other stakeholders in this community that have done an extraordinary job changing that from a sewer to a AAA trout stream. But there are still areas of that river that are compromised. And this issue is a compliance issue. The only way to take care of it is by spreading the cost of it over as many people as possible in order to mitigate the cost on individual taxpayers.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about firearms and public safety. No right in the U.S. Constitution is absolute. Each individual right and liberty in the Constitution must be balanced against our government's obligations to ensure domestic tranquility and protect life. In light of one tragedy after another caused by individuals using firearms, various states have enacted legislation to bring about meaningful firearm reform that will cut down on the frequency and scale of these acts of violence. In the last session of the PA General Assembly, legislation was introduced that required gun owners to safely store firearms if a person who cannot legally possess a firearm lives in the owner's residence, and to require gun owners to report the loss or theft of a firearm within 24 hours of the discovery of the loss or theft. Mr. Blake, this goes to you first. What efforts or legislative reforms do you support, if any, that would address firearm accidents and intentional firearm violence? Please explain your answer.
So I have supported some responsible gun control measures in Harrisburg. The most recent one, I voted on it before we ended the recent session, that had to do with circumstances involving protect from abuse PFAs, where, you know, the issues associated with the aggressor owning a gun and having responsibility to turn that gun over either to police or to a qualified third party in order to protect an abused spouse. So there have been things that we've done that are common sense. I'm a gun rights believer. I understand the Constitution, the federal Constitution. I wish that we had a little more leadership from the federal level on this. We actually, at one point in time, had an assault weapons ban on the books, but it went away and didn't come back. I think these tragedies warrant common sense legislation. When our founders were writing the rules about guns in this country, we didn't have weapons of mass destruction getting in the hands of citizens who may not have had all their faculties. So there are things that we can do with background checks. There are things that we can do to advance safety. Listen, we're never going to be able to protect every citizen all the time, but common sense things that don't impinge on our outdoorsmen and our hunters and responsible gun owners. Those are things that I think are possible. Again, if we were to consider working together across the aisle and negotiating something that can get 102 votes in the House and 26 votes in the Senate and the signature by the governor.
Thank you. Mr. Scavo?
I'm going to draw on former State Representative Ed Stabak's NRA A rating and his pro-hunter, pro-freedom of firearms stance. My opponent has an NRA F rating. So when John talks about opportunities to reach across the aisle, I think he's going to reach across the aisle and try to take your firearms. It's a very serious, not many people get an NRA F rating that represent people here in Northeast Pennsylvania, hunters like my father and my son-in-law and my stepfather who's in the audience. So, I serve on the Old Fort School Board. And when we talk about these disasters and these things that happen, they're from students that are reaching out for help from single-family homes. Instead of restricting someone's right or taking their right away, I would say we should add another mental health person to our school districts to spot these people and to eliminate that without taking your firearms or without infringing on your Second Amendment rights. We should also have mental health hospitals, and like we used to have at Clark Summit, where people that are prone to do this can receive treatment instead of putting them out on the streets. I mean, it's a very serious discussion. I don't see how curtailing the firearm ownership of my father or myself or my son or Ed Stabak or anybody like that is going to solve the solution. There's not, and by the way, I'm an NRA Life member, which means I pay $1,000 and take training to go through this, like Mr. Stabak. But I can tell you this, there are people out there that do have access to firearms that are against the law and have them illegally, unlawfully, like in gangs. That's where the problems need to be researched. But what happens in the school districts like Parkland, it's hard in the school districts. Make sure that they're treated like government buildings so that when John and I walk into Harrisburg, we're searched, metal detected. That's probably good for school districts too.
Thank you. This next question you will get to answer first, Mr. Scavo. A September 2018 Franklin and Marshall poll reported that 51% of respondents thought abortion should be legal under certain circumstances. 34% of respondents thought abortion should be legal under any circumstances. And 12% of the respondents thought abortion should be illegal under all circumstances. Recent efforts in our state legislature have tried to restrict women's rights to timely and accessible abortion services. If elected, would you support or oppose any restrictions to Pennsylvania women's right to a safe and legal abortion?
I've had this viewpoint and standpoint. I was just received an A+ rating from the Pennsylvania Pro-Life Federation. Listen, it's unfortunate that if there's an unintended or unwanted pregnancy, but I take to issue Mr. Frank Andrews, he's a radio talk show host on WLK. He had to go to the Soviet Union, Russia. He had to go to countries outside of America to adopt because we're aborting thousands that add up to millions of unborn American citizens. I mean, that's a pretty serious thing. There's families out there that want a child to love, to raise, to bring up, to have a family with. So I am opposed to abortion in all shapes and forms, especially with the latest movie out, Gosnell, that happened right here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, where these abortions were ignored and where healthy young women went in and died, whether it was because of infection or whatever the procedure of their operation was. It's pretty gruesome stuff. So I would be opposed to abortion. I would help make the adoption regulations easier so that you can adopt those children, because you know what, if they're not aborted and they come to full term, then we also have to be prepared for those consequences and to have adoption placement, which will be very, very easy. Pennsylvania as a Commonwealth it'll be known for how well we take care of that child that was conceived and then given up for adoption. So that's a pretty easy one for me. I'm just pro-life all the way.
Thank you. Mr. Blake?
So I put up pro-life votes on the floor of the Senate since I've been in the chamber, but I've also been wary of language on the page that clearly and unequivocally would rob a woman of her constitutional rights. So I've had to reconcile my own Roman Catholic upbringing and my own orientation, which is not dissimilar from my colleague, with my oath to the Constitution. Even Brett Kavanaugh says this is settled law. But the reality of it is that women can't be denied the right, and I don't like practicing healthcare on the floor of the Senate. I think the relationship between a woman and her doctor is also sacrosanct. I don't think we should be insinuating ourselves into that situation. I've often said, and when I've done surveys on this, that when health of the mother is at stake, when it's been incest or rape, that those are extraordinary circumstances that require thoughtful attention from the public policy sector. But at the end of the day, the women in this country can't be sent back to the world before, where they're in back rooms and where their lives are in danger. We need to regulate to guarantee that the tragedy that you mentioned never occurs in this Commonwealth again. And we have changed the rules since that tragedy. We have changed the rules with respect to ambulatory care and other providers. But it should be legal, it should be rare, but I won't vote to violate the constitutional rights of women.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, depending on what clock you look at. But I think what I'd like to do is ask that we just have 1 minute for this answer, and then we'll go on to the closing statements. So the question is, and this deals with state and local government relations. State preemption laws establish state authority over local government authority in a particular area of regulation. For example, the Pennsylvania legislature has attempted to preempt municipal laws regarding firearms, use of plastic bags, sale of soda and tobacco. Such state preemption typically occurs after lobbying by large, well-funded industries. Should state legislatures preempt local government laws that the local officials perceive to be in their community's best interests? Mr. Blake, this goes to you first.
So the short answer is no. We always cherish local control until we don't want to let you have it. And so I voted against the preemption on the plastic bag thing. If you want to look into the research on this, Europe is light years ahead of us. We really, I don't think we should discourage. Listen, I think that I've always agreed with the idea of being close to the people, guaranteeing that representation reflected the will of the people. And local government officials, I think, are close to it every day. They meet those challenges right at their doorstep every day. And if the majority of the people in a community across the state goes to their elected officials and says, we want this in our community, I think as an elected official and a public servant, you have some responsibility to listen to that voice. I know I do as a senator. I look at the people in the eye of my district every day. They ask me tough questions, I gotta give them a truthful answer. But I also know that in order to navigate Harrisburg, you have to keep in mind what I just said earlier about local control until we don't want to give local control.
Thank you. Mrs. Scavo?
It's particularly as it relates to firearms. So you know what, a sidearm would be legal in Old Forge, but not legal in Scranton. You can't have it. Why do we need more regulations to make life harder? Soda taxes? It's just, preemption needs to exist in Harrisburg at that level for that reason. Because we don't need to encumber or enslave our people with another regulation here at the local level. And it just makes it absolutely too hard to enforce. But I can tell you this, with regards to regulations, you know, our volunteer firemen in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania are worth $10 billion. In order to ride on the back of that truck and get young people interested, they have to do anywhere from 80 to 200 hours worth of book time before they can even get on that truck. I say our firefighters need help. Let's relax some of those overbearing regulations and give a $250 tax credit to every active volunteer fireman right off the bottom of their 940, because that's what the issue is.
Thank you. So at this point, we'd like to move to closing statements, and Mr. Blake will do his closing statement first, and then we'll turn to Mr. Scavo.
So again, thank you to Dr. Harris, thank you to the League of Women Voters, thank you to the university, thank you to all of you for being here and your civic engagement, and thank you to my able opponent, Frank Scavo. I've worked really hard for 8 years to earn the trust and the confidence of the people I represent in the 22nd District. I don't miss any votes. I read the words on the page to make sure that I understand what it means for the people I represent. I consider myself very vigilant as a senator on behalf of the people of the 22nd District. I have been responsive to the needs of the people in my district and constituent concerns. I've worked with local governments, I've worked with school districts, I've worked with the nonprofits. We've delivered about $185 million worth of state investment because we provided the technical assistance to the folks to get into the queue to compete for your tax dollars to come home. That supported emergency management, fire, police, transportation, infrastructure, flood control, arts and culture, you name it. Stormwater, sanitary sewer. We've actually gone to bat to make sure that the people of the 22nd District get the fair share of the taxes that you work so hard to pay. I really feel that I have two obligations to you, always to be responsive to your needs and the challenges that you face, but also to be an effective lawmaker when I'm down there and to represent your sensibility and to meet your aspirations. I've been really effective as a lawmaker despite my minority representation in the Senate. I have good friends on the Republican side with whom I've worked to get really good things done for our communities. I've advanced legislation that I think will eventually lead to the city of Scranton exiting Act 47. Distress status after 25 years. I've done everything I can to help my largest school district that has 10,000 students and 650 teachers, and I've tried to be as equally zealous with respect to the other districts that I represent across the 22nd District. At the end of the day, the report card is in my voting record. It's in whether or not I'm still trusted to represent the 22nd District, and I humbly request your vote so I can continue to work hard for you for the next 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Scavo.
Thank you. John is a great guy. But if you vote for John, you will not get school district property tax elimination. If you vote for John, you won't get majority representation, because that's the way it is, ladies and gentlemen. There's a billboard when you drive into Scranton. It says, John Blake, $185 million returned to the district. And that's with minority representation. If you want more projects brought back to your district, majority representation, I can guarantee you we will have more projects done in Northeast Pennsylvania with property tax elimination. You know, John has a lot of experience with economic development. Now, you all know I've had my differences with Senator Bob Mello. Senator Bob Mello has done great for this area. Commonwealth College, he's done the baseball stadium. Even in Luzerne County, he has helped with the arena. But what I see after John's 8 years of being in the Senate and $800,000 that we have paid him through the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I still see a lack of jobs. I still see that we have to call Domino's to get your potholes fixed. I still see that we don't have economic opportunity and a thriving Commonwealth. That's what I would bring to Pennsylvania. I'm a businessman from the private sector. What I would do is I would make a climate here so that our young people don't have to leave King's College and the University of Scranton and Marywood or Penn State and relocate like my daughter from Temple is going to have to do. They can stay right here in Pennsylvania, but it's not going to happen when you trust in the older system. Because our senior citizens have done that and they got burned with gambling and the gambling tax that we were supposed to have, what? Property tax elimination. So I can tell you this. I promise to you that I will do three things. Number one, eliminate your school district property taxes. Number two, grow the economy of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Number three, your children will not have to leave you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to thank all of you for being here with us this evening on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Lackawanna County and the Political Science Department here at the University of Scranton. We hope that tonight's event will assist you in deciding for whom you will vote on November 6th, and we do want to remind you to go out and vote on November 6th. Thank you.